I never imagined that agreeing to keep my twin boys away from family gatherings would expose the most toxic manipulation scheme I had ever encountered. When my sister-in-law Sandra cornered me after Thanksgiving dinner, declaring that 6-year-old Jacob and Matthew were too disruptive for family events, I thought I was being mature by agreeing to their absence. Sandra suggested they stay home from future gatherings for everyone's peace of mind, and I believed I was showing consideration for the family's comfort. What I didn't realize was that my compliance would unravel years of calculated psychological warfare that had been systematically destroying relationships within my husband's family. The Thanksgiving confrontation still burned in my memory as December snow began covering our suburban Milwaukee neighborhood. Sandra had waited until the perfect moment to strike, pulling me aside, while David helped his father carve the turkey and the boys played innocently in the backyard with their cousins. "Eileen, we need to talk." Sandra had set her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for delivering unwelcome news. At 38, she commanded attention wherever she went, her perfectly styled auburn hair and designer clothing making her the undisputed queen of family gatherings. As David's older sister and the self-appointed family coordinator Sandra wielded influence that seemed to extend into every corner of their tight-knit clan. "The boys are sweet, don't get me wrong." She had continued her manicured fingers drumming against the granite kitchen counter. "But they're just so energetic. The spilled grape juice on Grandma's antique tablecloth, the way they ran through the house during gift exchanges, the constant noise level. Some of the older relatives mentioned feeling overwhelmed." I had felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, remembering how Jacob had accidentally knocked over his cup while reaching for the mashed potatoes and how Matthew had squealed with excitement when he opened his new toy truck. Normal 6-year-old behavior suddenly seemed like criminal offenses under Sandra's scrutiny. Maybe it would be better if they stayed home from Christmas Eve this year. She had suggested, her tone gentle but firm. "You know how Grandpa's health has been declining, and Mom always gets stressed when the house feels chaotic. We could have a quieter, more peaceful gathering where everyone can really connect." Standing there in David's childhood kitchen, surrounded by family photos that seemed to mock my outsider status, I had nodded my agreement. After 4 years of marriage, I still felt like I was auditioning for acceptance in this established family dynamic. Maybe Sandra was right. Maybe my boys were too much for their refined sensibilities. When I told David about my decision later that evening, his response had stung more than Sandra's criticism. Instead of defending our children or questioning his sister's request, he had seemed relieved. "Maybe it is better this way," he had said while folding laundry with mechanical precision. "You know how my family values quiet gatherings. The boys can be pretty intense when they get excited." His words had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger each day leading up to Christmas Eve. I found myself second-guessing every parenting decision, wondering if I had failed to teach my sons proper behavior, questioning whether their natural enthusiasm was actually a character flaw that needed correction. I threw myself into creating a magical Christmas Eve experience at home, buying special craft supplies, planning elaborate games, and stocking up on their favorite snacks. If we couldn't be with family, I would make sure Jacob and Matthew felt celebrated and loved in our own space. The boys had been disappointed but accepting when I explained that we would have our own special celebration while Daddy visited his family. They trusted my judgment completely, which made the situation even more heartbreaking. Their innocent questions about why they couldn't see their cousins and grandparents carved deeper wounds into my already bruised confidence. As Christmas Eve morning arrived, I busied myself preparing our alternative celebration, determined to make the best of the situation I had agreed to create. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate, and I had wrapped special gifts for each boy to open throughout the day. Yet underneath my forced cheerfulness lay a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with David's family. The text message arrived at 9:30 that morning, just as I was setting up a gingerbread house construction project on the dining room table. The sender was Martha David's cousin, whom I had met only briefly at previous gatherings. Her message was simple, but earth-shattering. "Are you and the boys okay? Sandra said you were all sick and couldn't make it tonight." My hands trembled as I read the words again, the gingerbread pieces scattering across the table, as the truth hit me like a physical blow. Sandra had lied to the entire family about why we weren't attending Christmas Eve dinner. Instead of telling them about her concerns regarding the boys' behavior, she'd invented a completely different narrative spinning our absence as illness rather than exclusion. The revelation about Sandra's deception consumed my thoughts throughout the remainder of December and into the cold January days that followed. When I confronted David about his sister's dishonesty, his response revealed another layer of troubling family dynamics that I had been blind to for years. Sandra was probably just trying to save face, David had explained with maddening casualness, not looking up from his laptop as he scrolled through work emails. She didn't want the family thinking poorly of us for not bringing the kids. His dismissive attitude towards such a significant lie left me speechless. The man I had married, who claimed to value honesty and integrity above all else, was making excuses for his sister's manipulation as if it were completely normal behavior. But David, she made up an entire story about us being sick. I had pressed my voice, rising with frustration. "She lied to your parents, your grandparents, everyone. Doesn't that bother you at all?" "Look, Eileen, you agreed to keep the boys home," he had replied, finally meeting my eyes with an expression that seemed more annoyed than sympathetic. "Sandra just handled the explanation her way. Does it really matter what reason she gave?" That conversation marked the beginning of my awakening to patterns I had previously ignored or rationalized away. Over the following weeks, as we maintained the agreement to exclude Jacob and Matthew from family events, I began documenting the subtle ways Sandra had been undermining my position within the family structure. David's father celebrated his 65th birthday with a small gathering in early January. Once again, David attended alone, while I stayed home with the boys, who were becoming increasingly confused about why Daddy's family gatherings had suddenly become off limits. When David returned that evening, he regaled us with stories about the delicious prime rib dinner and the touching speeches honoring his father's achievements in the construction business. "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway," David had said when Jacob asked why they couldn't go see Grandpa on his birthday. "It was mostly adults talking about boring grown-up stuff. Much better for you guys to stay home and build that awesome fort in the living room." The pattern repeated itself later in January when David's grandmother turned 90. This milestone birthday celebration was held at an upscale restaurant, and David spent hours getting ready, selecting the perfect tie, and ensuring his appearance met family expectations. He returned home with elaborate descriptions of the 3-course meal and the professional photographer who had captured 4 generations of family memories. "Grandma looked so frail," David reported as he hung up his dress clothes. "She probably would have been overwhelmed by the boys' energy. Better that she could enjoy a peaceful celebration." Each exclusion felt like another step away from belonging, another confirmation that my children and I were somehow deficient in the eyes of David's family. I began questioning everything about my parenting approach, wondering if my permissive style had truly created behavioral problems that made my sons unwelcome in polite society. The boys themselves were developing their own theories about the situation. Jacob had started asking why Daddy's family didn't like them anymore, his 6-year-old mind unable to comprehend the complex adult dynamics at play. Matthew had begun acting out at home, his frustration manifesting in tantrums and defiance that seemed to confirm every criticism Sandra had made about their behavior. During this period of isolation, I found myself analyzing past family interactions with new clarity. I remembered how Sandra often spoke over me during conversations, redirecting attention to topics where she held expertise. I recalled the subtle way certain relatives would drift away when I approached their small talk circles, their body language suggesting discomfort or disinterest in my contributions. Most troubling were the memories of Sandra's pointed comments about my career choices and parenting philosophy. As a freelance graphic designer, I had the flexibility to be present for my children's daily needs, but Sandra frequently made remarks about the importance of traditional family structures, where mothers provided full-time attention to domestic responsibilities. It must be challenging to maintain professional focus when you're constantly interrupted by children. She had once observed during a holiday gathering her comment delivered with a sympathetic smile that somehow felt more like criticism than understanding. These recollections painted a picture of systematic undermining that had been so gradual and subtle that I had failed to recognize it as intentional manipulation. Sandra had been positioning herself as the family authority on child-rearing marriage dynamics and social appropriateness, using her criticisms of me to establish her superior understanding of what constituted acceptable behavior within their family culture. The devastating discovery came through a technology mishap that revealed the true scope of David's betrayal. He had been forwarding text messages to his brother Kevin, intending to share information about an upcoming work project. Instead, the message thread he accidentally sent included a conversation where he had been disparaging my character and motivations to his family members. In these messages, David had portrayed me as elitist and demanding, claiming that I thought my children were too good for family gatherings and that I had become increasingly snobby since our marriage. He had twisted the entire narrative, making me the villain in a story where I had actually been the victim of his sister's manipulation. Kevin's response in the forwarded thread was particularly painful to read. "I always wondered when Eileen started acting like she was better than the rest of us. Makes sense now that you explain it this way. Mom and Dad were really hurt that she suddenly didn't want to bring the boys around anymore." The betrayal cut deeper than Sandra's original manipulation because it came from the person who should have been my strongest advocate and defender. David had not only failed to protect me from his sister's schemes, but had actively participated in destroying my reputation within his family, creating a completely false narrative that painted me as the perpetrator rather than the victim of exclusionary behavior. The discovery of David's duplicity in February marked a turning point in my understanding of the situation I had unknowingly entered. Instead of confronting him immediately about the text messages, I decided to investigate the broader patterns of dysfunction within his family system. The pain of his betrayal was overwhelming, but it also provided clarity about the need to gather more information before determining my next steps. My first move was reaching out to Martha, the cousin who had unknowingly exposed Sandra's initial lie about our Christmas Eve absence. I invited her for coffee at a neutral location, a cozy cafe in downtown Milwaukee, where we could speak privately without family members overhearing our conversation. Martha arrived early, her nervous energy evident as she fidgeted with her purse and checked her phone repeatedly. At 32, she was closer to my age than most of David's relatives, and her position as a cousin, rather than immediate family member, gave her a unique perspective on the family dynamics. "I'm so glad you reached out," Martha said as we settled into a corner booth with our steaming lattes. "I've been wanting to talk to someone about the family situation for years, but never knew who I could trust with my observations." Over the course of 2 hours, Martha revealed shocking information about Sandra's long-standing pattern of manipulation and control within the family structure. She described incidents spanning more than a decade, where Sandra had systematically driven away family members who challenged her authority or threatened her position as the primary influencer of family decisions. "Sandra has always needed to be the center of everything." Martha explained, her voice barely above a whisper despite our private setting. When David's brother Kevin was married to his first wife, Nicole, Sandra made her life absolutely miserable. She constantly criticized Nicole's cooking, her housekeeping, her parenting style, everything. Eventually, Nicole couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. This revelation stunned me because I had always been told that Kevin's divorce was the result of Nicole's mental health issues and her inability to adjust to family life. Sandra had apparently crafted an entirely different narrative to explain Nicole's departure, one that protected Sandra's image while destroying Nicole's reputation. What about other family members? I asked, thinking about the relatives who seemed to attend gatherings irregularly or appeared uncomfortable during family interactions. Martha's expression grew even more serious as she detailed additional casualties of Sandra's psychological warfare. David's uncle Robert and his wife Carol had gradually stopped attending family events after Sandra publicly humiliated Carol for bringing store-bought dessert to a potluck dinner. Sandra had made cutting remarks about the importance of homemade contributions and family traditions, effectively shaming Carol into feeling unwelcome at future gatherings. The worst part is how Sandra positions herself as the victim. Martha continued stirring her coffee absently. Whenever someone stops coming to events or distances themselves from the family, Sandra creates this narrative about how hurt and confused she is by their rejection. She makes herself look like the wounded party while systematically destroying relationships. Most shocking of all was Martha's revelation about the genuine affection many family members had felt for me and my children during our 4 years of marriage. Contrary to Sandra's claims about relatives feeling overwhelmed by the boys' energy, Martha described how Jacob and Matthew had brought joy and liveliness to gatherings that had become increasingly tense and artificial under Sandra's rigid control. "Your boys reminded us what family gatherings used to feel like," Martha said with genuine warmth, before Sandra started micromanaging every interaction and imposing all these unspoken rules about appropriate behavior. The older relatives especially loved watching the kids play and hearing their laughter echo through the house. This information directly contradicted everything Sandra had told me about family reactions to my children's presence. The supposed complaints from elderly relatives had apparently been fabricated, entirely part of Sandra's strategy to isolate me from potential allies within the family system. Martha also revealed the existence of a group text thread that I had never been included in, despite it supposedly being for family coordination and communication. Sandra managed this thread, using it to control information flow and coordinate family members' responses to various situations. "She's been using that group chat to tell everyone how to interact with you," Martha admitted reluctantly. "Instructions to be polite, but distant warnings about your supposedly attention-seeking behavior, guidance on how to avoid encouraging what she calls your disruptive influence on family traditions." The evidence Martha presented painted a picture of calculated psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple personality conflicts or family preferences. Sandra had been conducting a deliberate campaign to isolate me from family support, undermine my confidence as a mother and wife, and position herself as the protector of family values against my supposedly negative influence. As our coffee meeting concluded, Martha made a request that both terrified and empowered me. "Would you be willing to talk to some of the other people Sandra has pushed away over the years? I think they would want to know they weren't alone in what they experienced." Walking back to my car that afternoon, I felt simultaneously devastated and validated. The pain of learning about years of manipulation was overwhelming, but the confirmation that my instincts about feeling excluded and unwelcome had been accurate provided a foundation for moving forward. I was no longer questioning my own perceptions or wondering if I was being oversensitive about family dynamics. The investigation Martha had suggested would require courage to contact people I barely knew and ask them to relive painful experiences. But it also offered the possibility of building a coalition of truth-tellers who could challenge Sandra's narrative and expose the systematic destruction she had been inflicting on family relationships for over a decade. That evening, as I tucked Jacob and Matthew into bed and listened to their innocent chatter about their day at school, I made a silent promise that I would not allow Sandra's manipulation to continue damaging their sense of belonging and self-worth. The fight ahead would be difficult, but my children deserved better than a future shaped by lies and exclusion. March arrived with the brutal honesty of a Wisconsin winter giving way to spring, and I knew the time had come to confront David with everything I had learned about his family's dysfunction and his own complicity in the systematic campaign against me, Armed with Martha's revelations and my own growing understanding of the manipulation patterns, I scheduled a session with a marriage counselor to ensure our conversation would take place in a controlled environment. The counseling office felt sterile and uncomfortable as we settled into opposite chairs, David's body language already defensive before I had spoken a single word. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a therapist recommended by my physician, had experience dealing with family system dysfunction and had agreed to facilitate our difficult conversation. David, I need you to be completely honest with me about what's been happening with your family and your role in it. I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. I've learned some very disturbing information, and I need to hear your side before I can decide how to move forward. Initially, David maintained his stance that I was overreacting to normal family dynamics and personality differences. He insisted that Sandra meant well and that any conflicts were the result of miscommunication rather than intentional manipulation. His defensiveness only strengthened my resolve to push for the complete truth. Martha showed me the group text thread. I said quietly, watching David's face pale as he realized the extent of my knowledge. I know about the coordinated campaign to isolate me, the instructions about how family members should interact with me, all of it. The facade crumbled gradually like a dam developing cracks under increasing pressure. David's shoulders slumped as he began acknowledging his awareness of Sandra's behavior, though he initially tried to minimize his own participation in the schemes. I knew Sandra could be controlling, he admitted reluctantly, his voice barely audible in the small office. But I thought it was just her personality. She's always been the one who organized family events and kept everyone connected. Dr. Reynolds guided our conversation with gentle but persistent questions that revealed the deeper motivations behind David's complicity. Slowly, painfully, David began admitting to the financial and emotional pressures that had influenced his willingness to enable Sandra's manipulation, rather than defend his wife and children. Sandra threatened to cut me off from the family business if I didn't keep you in line. David finally confessed his words, tumbling out in a rush of guilt and shame. Dad's construction company provides our health insurance and retirement benefits. Sandra manages the family trust that's supposed to help pay for the boys' college education. She made it clear that supporting you against her wishes would cost us everything. This revelation explained so much about David's behavior over the past 4 years. His reluctance to challenge Sandra's criticisms, his failure to defend me during family conflicts, his willingness to accept her version of events even when they contradicted his own observations. He'd been choosing financial security over family loyalty, prioritizing his relationship with Sandra over his commitment to his wife and children. But the financial blackmail was only part of the story. As our session continued, David revealed the extent to which he had been serving as Sandra's spy within our marriage, reporting back on my reactions, frustrations, and private conversations. She would ask how you were handling family feedback. David explained, his face flushed with embarrassment. I thought she was genuinely concerned about family harmony. I didn't realize she was using the information to plan her next moves against you. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest. Every private moment of vulnerability I had shared with David, every expression of doubt or frustration about family dynamics had been transmitted back to Sandra and used as ammunition in her campaign to undermine my position within the family structure. Dr. Reynolds helped me process the emotional impact of these revelations while maintaining focus on the practical implications for our marriage and family. David's willingness to prioritize Sandra's approval over his wife's well-being had created a fundamental breach of trust that would require extensive work to repair. During a particularly intense portion of our session, David made an admission that revealed the true scope of Sandra's long-term plans for my place in the family. In what he claimed was an accidental slip during a heated argument, he revealed that Sandra had been pressuring him to consider divorce if I couldn't be brought into compliance with family expectations. She said if you couldn't learn to appreciate family values and raise the boys with proper discipline, maybe you weren't the right fit for our family. David said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She offered to help me find a good divorce attorney and even said the family would support me through the process." The room fell silent as the implications of this statement settled over us. Sandra hadn't just been trying to exclude me from family events or undermine my confidence. She'd been actively working to destroy my marriage and remove me from the family entirely with David's implicit cooperation. But the most devastating revelation came when I confronted David about some suspicious behavior I had noticed over the past few weeks. He had been taking phone calls outside, staying late at work without clear explanations, and seemed distracted during our evening conversations with the boys. "David, I found the business card in your jacket pocket," I said, pulling out the evidence I had discovered while doing laundry. "Thomas Richardson, family law attorney. The appointment confirmations were in there too." David's face crumpled as he realized he'd been caught in the ultimate betrayal. Not only had he been complicit in Sandra's manipulation, but he had been actively planning to leave our marriage with her encouragement and financial support. The secret meetings with the divorce attorney, funded by Sandra's connections and resources, represented a level of premeditation that shattered any remaining trust between us. "I was just exploring options," David said weakly, but his explanation rang hollow in the small counseling office. "Sandra said I needed to protect myself and the boys if you continued to be difficult about family relationships." As our session ended, Dr. Reynolds provided resources for individual therapy and recommended that we take time apart to process what had been revealed before making any decisions about the future of our marriage. David agreed to move in with his parents temporarily, though I suspected Sandra would use his presence in their home to further manipulate the situation. Driving home alone that evening, I felt the strange combination of devastation and liberation that comes from finally knowing the complete truth about a situation you've been struggling to understand. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, but the clarity it provided would allow me to make informed decisions about how to protect my children and rebuild my life. The war Sandra had been waging against me was finally out in the open, and I was ready to fight back. April brought the kind of fresh energy that Wisconsin springs are famous for, and I channeled that sense of renewal into building a coalition of allies who had been damaged by Sandra's manipulation over the years. Instead of confronting the situation head-on while isolated and vulnerable, I decided to systematically reconnect with every family member who'd been pushed away by Sandra's toxic behavior. My first contact was with Robert and Carol David's uncle and aunt, who had mysteriously stopped attending family gatherings approximately 5 years earlier. Martha had provided their contact information, along with a brief explanation of how Sandra had driven them away through public humiliation and systematic exclusion. Robert answered my phone call with cautious surprise, his voice warming considerably when I explained who I was and why I was reaching out. "Eileen, we've wondered about you and the boys for years," he said with genuine concern. "We always enjoyed talking with you at the gatherings we attended, but Sandra made it clear our presence wasn't appreciated anymore." We arranged to meet at their home in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown Milwaukee. Carol greeted me at the door with the kind of warm hug I hadn't received from David's family members in years, and their living room felt more welcoming than any space I had occupied with David's immediate family. Over homemade coffee and Carol's incredible banana bread, they shared their story of gradual exclusion and systematic humiliation. The breaking point had come during a family potluck where Carol had brought a store-bought apple pie instead of her usual homemade dessert due to recovering from minor surgery on her hand. "Sandra made such a scene." Carol recalled her voice still carrying traces of the hurt she had experienced years earlier. She announced to the entire gathering that she was disappointed in the decline of family traditions and the loss of values that had once made our celebrations special. Everyone knew she was talking about my pie. Robert's anger was more apparent than his wife's, his jaw tightening as he described Sandra's follow-up campaign to make them feel unwelcome at subsequent events. She started scheduling gatherings without including us in the planning conversations. When we would show up, she would make comments about unexpected guests and not having enough food prepared. Most revealing was their account of Sandra's financial manipulations within the family structure. As the person responsible for coordinating group gifts and managing contributions for major celebrations, Sandra had been skimming small amounts from family collections and using her position to control who received recognition and appreciation. She would collect $50 from each family for Dad's birthday gift, then buy something that cost half that amount and pocket the difference, Robert explained. When I questioned her about the discrepancy, she accused me of being cheap and not understanding the complexities of gift planning. Carol also revealed that Sandra had been spreading rumors about their marriage and financial stability, suggesting to other family members that Robert's construction business was failing and that they were becoming too proud to accept family help. These lies had created distance between Robert and his brother David's father, who had begun treating Robert with uncharacteristic coolness. The hardest part was watching the family dynamics deteriorate, Carol said sadly. Sandra was poisoning relationships systematically, but she was so subtle about it that people didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. My next crucial conversation was with Nicole Kevin's ex-wife, who'd been driven from the family through Sandra's psychological warfare. Martha had helped arrange this meeting, which took place at a restaurant where Nicole felt comfortable discussing her painful experiences. Nicole arrived looking guarded and somewhat skeptical, clearly uncertain about why I wanted to revisit such a difficult period of her life. But as I explained what I had been experiencing and the patterns I was beginning to recognize, her demeanor shifted to one of relief and validation. I thought I was losing my mind during those final years of my marriage. Nicole admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Sandra would say things that sounded supportive on the surface, but somehow left me feeling inadequate and confused about my own perceptions. She described a systematic campaign of undermining that had included criticism of her housekeeping standards, questions about her commitment to family traditions, and subtle suggestions that she wasn't providing adequate support for Kevin's career advancement. Sandra had positioned herself as the expert on marriage and family management, offering helpful advice that actually served to highlight Nicole's supposed deficiencies. The worst part was how she turned Kevin against me. Nicole said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She would have private conversations with him about my behavior, planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability and my commitment to our family. Eventually, Kevin started seeing me through Sandra's eyes instead of his own. Nicole's account of Sandra's manipulation tactics provided crucial insight into the psychological methods being used against me. The pattern included isolation from potential support systems, constant criticism disguised as helpful feedback, and the cultivation of allies within the family who would reinforce Sandra's narrative about the target's problematic behavior. Most importantly, Nicole revealed that Sandra's campaign against her had included financial manipulation and legal maneuvering. Sandra had helped Kevin document incidents of Nicole's supposed instability, building a case for favorable custody arrangements in the eventual divorce proceedings. She had been planning my removal from the family for months before I even realized what was happening, Nicole explained. Every argument Kevin and I had, every moment of frustration I expressed, was being reported back to Sandra and used as evidence of my unfitness as a wife and mother. Through these conversations, I began to understand that Sandra's behavior wasn't simply controlling or difficult, but represented a sophisticated pattern of psychological manipulation designed to maintain her position of power within the family hierarchy. She systematically identified threats to her influence and then orchestrated campaigns to eliminate those threats through reputation destruction and relationship manipulation. My final crucial alliance came from an unexpected source: David's grandmother's live-in caregiver, an experienced woman named Patricia, who had been observing family dynamics for the past 3 years. Martha had mentioned Patricia's growing concerns about Sandra's treatment of the elderly woman, and I decided to approach her directly. Patricia was initially reluctant to discuss family matters with someone she barely knew, but when I explained what I had been experiencing and asked specifically about Sandra's behavior toward the grandmother, her professional concerns overcame her discretion. Sandra has been systematically isolating Mrs. Henderson from family members who might question Sandra's decisions about her care, Patricia revealed during our careful conversation. She controls who visits, what information gets shared about Mrs. Henderson's health, and even which family members receive updates about medical appointments. Most shocking was Patricia's revelation that Sandra had been pressuring the 90-year-old woman to change her will in estate planning, using emotional manipulation and threats about family unity to influence financial decisions that would benefit Sandra's position within the family structure. Mrs. Henderson has expressed concerns about Sandra's behavior to me privately, Patricia said carefully. She's not as frail and confused as Sandra portrays her to other family members. She's been documenting Sandra's actions with her attorney's help, but she's been waiting for the right moment to address the situation. By the end of April, I had built a network of allies who understood Sandra's manipulation tactics and were willing to support efforts to expose her behavior. Each person I spoke with had experienced similar patterns of systematic exclusion, psychological manipulation, and reputation destruction. Together, we represented a formidable coalition of witnesses who could challenge Sandra's narrative and provide evidence of her long-standing campaign against family unity. The upcoming Easter gathering would provide the perfect opportunity to bring these hidden truths into the open and confront Sandra's manipulation in front of the entire family. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt ready to fight back against the toxic dynamics that had been poisoning relationships for over a decade. The Easter Sunday that would forever change the dynamics of David's family arrived with the kind of crisp April morning that makes Wisconsin residents grateful for surviving another brutal winter. Instead of staying home as everyone expected, I had spent weeks planning a coordinated revelation that would expose Sandra's manipulation in front of the entire family gathering. My preparation had been meticulous and thorough. Working with Martha, Robert Carroll, and even Nicole, I had compiled a comprehensive documentation of Sandra's behavior patterns, financial irregularities, and systematic campaigns against family members over the past decade. The evidence filled a thick folder that I carried with me as I dressed carefully for what would either be my vindication or my final exclusion from David's family. Jacob and Matthew looked adorable in their new spring outfits, their excitement about seeing their cousins and grandparents for the first time in months, evident in their animated chatter during the car ride to David's parents' house. They had no idea they were about to witness a confrontation that would reshape their family relationships forever. "Mommy, will Daddy be happy to see us at the party?" Matthew asked from his booster seat, his 6-year-old intuition picking up on the tension that had been building in our household for weeks. "I think everyone will be surprised to see us today," I replied, carefully meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "But we belong at family gatherings, and it's time for everyone to remember that." The shock on Sandra's face when I walked through the front door carrying a covered dish and my folder of evidence was worth months of pain and uncertainty. She had clearly been expecting another quiet gathering where she could continue building her narrative about my antisocial behavior and unwillingness to participate in family traditions. "Eileen," she said, her voice artificially bright as she processed my unexpected presence. "What a surprise. I didn't think you were planning to join us today." "I wouldn't miss Easter with the family," I replied with a smile that felt more confident than I had managed in months. "The boys have been looking forward to seeing their cousins and grandparents." David appeared in the doorway behind Sandra, his face pale with anxiety as he realized his carefully constructed story about my attitude toward family gatherings was about to be challenged. Since our counseling session and his temporary move to his parents' house, we had maintained minimal contact, focused only on arrangements for the boys' care. The living room gradually filled with family members, including several faces that hadn't appeared at gatherings in recent years. Robert and Carol had accepted my invitation to attend, marking their first family event in over 5 years. Most significantly, Nicole had agreed to come with her children, creating a reunion that Sandra had never expected to see. Even David's grandmother looked more alert and engaged than I had seen her in months, her eyes bright with interest as she observed the unusual gathering dynamics from her comfortable chair near the fireplace. "This is quite a turnout." David's father commented, his confusion evident as he noticed the family members who had been absent from recent celebrations. "I haven't seen this many people at Easter in years." Sandra's discomfort was becoming increasingly apparent as she realized her control over guest lists and family narratives was being challenged. When she attempted to begin what I later learned was her planned intervention about my mental health and fitness as a mother, I politely but firmly interrupted her. "Before we begin our Easter celebration, I think there are some family issues that need to be addressed," I said, standing in the center of the room with my folder of evidence. "I've learned some very disturbing information about manipulation and financial irregularities that have been affecting our family relationships for years." The room fell silent except for the sound of children playing in the next room, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around them. I could see David's parents exchanging confused glances, clearly unprepared for any kind of serious family discussion during what was supposed to be a joyful holiday celebration. "I've been conducting an investigation into patterns of behavior that have driven away multiple family members over the past decade." I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "What I've discovered is a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation, financial fraud, and relationship destruction that has been orchestrated by one person in this room." Sandra's face had transformed from surprise to fury, her carefully maintained mask of family harmony slipping away to reveal the calculating manipulator underneath. "Eileen, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever paranoid theories you've developed," she said, her voice sharp with warning. "Actually, this is exactly the right time and place," I replied, opening my folder to reveal the documentation I had gathered. "Because everyone who has been affected by this behavior deserves to know the truth." Over the next hour, I systematically presented evidence of Sandra's manipulation tactics, supported by testimony from Robert, Carol, and Nicole. We revealed the group text thread that had excluded me from family communications, the financial skimming from group gifts, the lies told about various family members' motivations and behavior. Most damaging was the evidence of Sandra's attempts to destroy marriages and relationships within the family, including her current campaign against my marriage and her plans to help David pursue divorce proceedings with her financial backing. David's parents listened with growing horror as the scope of Sandra's deception became clear. His father was particularly upset to learn about the financial irregularities, while his mother seemed devastated to discover how many family relationships had been damaged by Sandra's interference. "I had no idea." David's mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Sandra, how could you have done these things to our family?" But the most powerful moment came when David's grandmother, who everyone had assumed was too frail to follow complex family discussions, requested assistance to stand and address the gathering. "I have been waiting for someone with enough courage to expose Sandra's behavior," she said, her voice stronger and clearer than anyone had heard in months. "I have been documenting her financial manipulations and psychological abuse with my attorney's help for over 2 years." The room erupted in shocked murmurs as the family matriarch revealed that she had been far more aware of Sandra's activities than anyone realized. She'd been waiting for the right moment and the right allies to bring the truth to light. "Sandra is no longer welcome to manage any family finances or coordinate family gatherings," the grandmother continued with surprising authority. "I have already removed her from my will and estate planning, and I am prepared to pursue legal action if necessary to recover the money she has stolen from family gift collections." Sandra's response was a mixture of desperate denials and angry counterattacks, but her credibility had been destroyed by the weight of evidence and testimony from multiple family members. Her attempts to portray herself as a victim of conspiracy and jealousy fell flat in the face of documented proof of her manipulative behavior. The Easter gathering that was supposed to be Sandra's final triumph in driving me away from the family had instead become the moment of her own downfall and exposure. For the first time in years, family members were talking honestly about relationships, expectations, and the toxic dynamics that had been poisoning their connections with each other. The months following the Easter revelation transformed David's family in ways that no one could have predicted when I first agreed to keep my children away from family gatherings. Sandra's removal from all positions of financial responsibility and event coordination created a power vacuum that was filled by collaborative decision-making and genuine communication for the first time in over a decade. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation had been chaotic and emotional. Sandra had stormed out of the Easter gathering after her grandmother's announcement, threatening legal action and family destruction if she was excluded from future events. But her threats rang hollow when faced with documented evidence of financial fraud and systematic manipulation that could result in criminal charges if pursued through legal channels. David's parents took immediate action to address the damage Sandra had caused. They reached out personally to every family member who had been driven away by her behavior, offering sincere apologies and invitations to rebuild damaged relationships. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but it marked the beginning of genuine healing within the family structure. Robert and Carol were among the first to re-engage with family activities, their warmth and humor bringing back memories of how enjoyable family gatherings had been before Sandra's toxic influence had made them into stress-filled obligations. Their construction business expertise also proved valuable in helping David's father address some of Sandra's financial irregularities within the family company. Nicole's reintegration was more complex due to her divorce from Kevin, but the family's acknowledgement of how badly she had been treated led to improved co-parenting arrangements and renewed relationships with extended family members who had previously sided against her. Her children were thrilled to reconnect with cousins and grandparents who had been largely absent from their lives during the years of Sandra's manipulation. Most significantly for my own family, David was forced to confront the full extent of his complicity in Sandra's schemes and make a choice between continuing to enable her behavior or committing to genuine change in his priorities and loyalties. The process was neither quick nor easy, requiring months of individual therapy and couples counseling to address the fundamental trust issues his betrayal had created. I was terrified of losing my family's approval. David admitted during one of our most difficult counseling sessions. I thought that meant going along with Sandra's version of what family loyalty looked like, even when it meant betraying you and the boys. Dr. Reynolds helped us work through the complex emotions surrounding David's choices while establishing clear boundaries for rebuilding our marriage. David had to demonstrate through consistent actions that he was willing to prioritize our immediate family over Sandra's demands, even if it meant ongoing conflict with his sister. The turning point came when Sandra attempted to orchestrate a counter-campaign against the family members who had exposed her behavior. She began spreading rumors in the community about our mental health, our financial stability, and our fitness as parents. When David learned about these attacks, he finally found the courage to confront his sister directly and demand that she stop trying to destroy our reputation. That was the moment I realized I could choose my wife and children over Sandra's manipulation, David reflected months later. Standing up to her felt terrifying, but it also felt like the first authentic thing I had done in years. My role in planning family events proved to be surprisingly natural and enjoyable. Without Sandra's rigid expectations and hidden agendas, gatherings became relaxed celebrations where people could connect authentically. I organized a summer barbecue that included all the previously excluded family members, creating an atmosphere of inclusion and genuine fun that reminded everyone why family relationships were worth preserving. Jacob and Matthew flourished in this new family environment. Their natural enthusiasm and energy, which Sandra had labeled as disruptive and inappropriate, was appreciated and celebrated by relatives who'd been prevented from expressing their genuine affection for the boys. They developed close relationships with their Uncle Robert, who taught them woodworking skills, and their great-grandmother, who shared stories about family history and traditions. "The boys bring such joy to our gatherings," David's mother commented during a family birthday party. "I can't believe I was convinced they were somehow problematic. Their laughter is exactly what our family needed to heal." Sandra's attempts to stage a comeback were persistent, but ultimately unsuccessful. She tried various strategies to regain her position within the family, including false apologies, claims of misunderstanding, and attempts to blame her behavior on stress and health issues. She even enrolled in therapy and anger management courses, hoping to demonstrate her commitment to change. However, the family had learned too much about her manipulation patterns to be easily deceived by surface-level changes. When Sandra attempted to resume her financial management responsibilities by offering to help with her grandmother's care expenses, the family unanimously rejected her involvement and established new systems for transparent financial management. The most satisfying moment of vindication came during the following year's Christmas Eve celebration, which I had offered to host in our home. The same dining room where I had once felt excluded and unwelcome was now filled with the sounds of children playing adults, laughing, and genuine family connection. David had grown into his role as a protective husband and father, actively defending our family against any criticism and maintaining clear boundaries with Sandra, despite her ongoing attempts to manipulate family dynamics. His transformation wasn't complete or perfect, but it was authentic and sustained by his commitment to prioritizing our marriage and children over family politics. "I never imagined that standing up to Sandra would actually make our family stronger," David admitted as we cleaned up after the successful Christmas Eve gathering. "I thought challenging her would destroy everything, but it turns out she was the one destroying everything all along." The boys, now 7 years old and thriving in their expanded family relationships, had no memory of feeling unwelcome or excluded from family gatherings. Their security in their place within the family structure provided the foundation for healthy relationships and strong self-esteem that would serve them well throughout their lives. Sandra eventually moved to another state, claiming that Wisconsin held too many painful memories for her to build a fresh start. Her departure was met with relief rather than sadness by most family members, though David struggled with grief over the loss of his relationship with his sister, even as he recognized the necessity of her absence for family healing. The life lesson that emerged from this painful experience was profound and transformative. I learned that accommodating toxic behavior in the name of keeping peace actually enables that behavior to flourish and damage innocent people. Standing up for truth and setting firm boundaries, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky, creates space for authentic relationships and genuine family harmony. Being disrupted by children's joy and energy isn't a problem that needs solving. I reflected as I watched Jacob and Matthew play with their cousins in our backyard. It's a blessing that needs protecting from people who can't appreciate life's beautiful chaos. The family Sandra had tried so hard to control through manipulation and exclusion had become stronger, more connected, and more joyful once her toxic influence was removed. The children she had labeled as disruptive had actually been the catalysts for breaking free from years of artificial constraints and rediscovering what family love really looks like. As I write this story, 2 years have passed since that transformative Easter Sunday. Our family gatherings are louder, messier, and more unpredictable than they were under Sandra's rigid control. They're also filled with genuine laughter, authentic connection, and the kind of unconditional love that makes family relationships worth fighting for. If you've experienced manipulation or exclusion within your own family relationships, what steps do you think are most important for protecting yourself and your children from toxic dynamics? Have you found the courage to stand up to family members who use emotional manipulation to control others? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery and transformation. Please like this story if it resonated with your own experiences, subscribe for more family stories about overcoming manipulation and finding authentic connection, and share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in facing difficult family dynamics. Remember that you deserve relationships built on respect, honesty, and genuine love, and it's never too late to start creating the family environment your children deserve.